Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, Katie and I are going to be responding to a question that we got during our Q&A poll. And the question was, how do you deal with all that's going on in the world? And we thought, why not kind of interact with this question? And the question did make Katie and I consider how we do deal with all that's going on in the world. And maybe there are some things you can take away from that. And I think there are certainly some things that we have learned in contemplating this question. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please leave a rating or a review on iTunes. If you watch on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe or hit the like button. Hit the like button and a thumbs up, both those. Or share it on social media. I don't know, all the things. Let's just get this thing rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
So you might be surprised to see our faces here yet again, 3 times in a week. It's kind of.
It's the first time we've ever done this. 3 podcasts in 1 week. And I think I like it. I know I always like sitting down and talking with you. And as we're going to discuss in today's episode, every time we record a podcast, it forces us to think through various topics. You know, even yesterday when we were recording what we're doing with homeschooling, that was really fun to kind of get on the same page once again. I mean, we said we feel very aligned with homeschooling, but even talking it out again was more aligning. And I feel like that happens time and time again when you and I sit down in this context and talk through various subjects. Because, I get to hear what you're thinking and various things. And of course, you get to hear what I'm thinking. And so I'm grateful for it.
Presumptuous. That was the word I was thinking of.
Oh.
It seems very presumptuous. But yes, you are right to all those things. And we are doing something a little bit different this December. And we are putting out an episode Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday instead of our regular Tuesday episode. And then we kind of started sneaking a Thursday episode in there. I don't know if you guys caught that. And now we're doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we'll see how that goes. We're just running it for December. But it has been fun. It's been a fun little evening routine for us to sit down and visit with you guys. So the question is, how do we deal with all that's going on in the world? And the truth is, we don't have time for it.
Yeah.
Because we're recording a podcast 3 nights a week.
It's funny. I know you're saying that in jest, but there is some truth to having a full life and really filling your life with the things that God has right before you and choosing to be more or less consumed with those things. And I do think, we want to be consumed with all that God has for us according to his will. Obviously, that comes through his word, his church, the family that we have been blessed with here on earth. And as of late, it's funny, when I read that question, it's not that I'm totally ignorant, naive as to what's going on in the world. Probably, some would argue that maybe I need to be more informed. But as we've stated before, I listen, a few days a week. I listen to Albert Mohler, The Briefing, and then I listen to NPR pretty regularly when I'm driving around in the car. And so my head's not completely in the sand when it comes to world events. And then in addition to that, and this may be where you get some of your news, Katie, is that we've got family members that are regularly sending us articles, news articles about various world events. And I don't have the opportunity to read all of them, but I do open my email box, more days than not, and find an article from a family member that they think I would be interested in that pertains to world events.
Yeah. It's funny because I would say I don't pay attention to world events at all, as in it's not part of my to-do list. But if something, I always know the big things that are going on in the world because everybody talks about the big things. It's like you can't avoid it. You're at church, you're at small group, you're in the family text thread, you log onto YouTube, it's suggested videos, regardless of what voices you're listening to or what news outlets, or I don't listen to any news outlets, but I listen to a lot of different people, and all these people give their take on something when it's big, when it's a war, like when you have Israel or when you have Ukraine and Russia, or a vaccine or a mandate, or, that stuff. Everyone's got their opinion on it and is doing an opinion piece online. And so I don't have to try to figure out what's going on in the world. I feel like it's just coming at me.
Yeah.
And I get a general beat on it, I should say, just by reading the headlines on this stuff.
Yeah, every so often, and this happened about a month ago for me, as I will feel, I guess, the need, or I'll feel some sort of responsibility to be more informed. Well, yeah, it happened shortly after the war with Israel and Palestine kicked off. That after the Hamas terrorist attacks, I was like, well, I need to be up to date on what's going on here. And I started logging into, I think I even said I subscribed to Daily Wire. I was logging into CNN on a regular basis. Like I said, listening to NPR, and it was like 4 days of that. I was like, I can't do this. Like this pace that I set here is not sustainable for my mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. And I just kind of went back to like I said, the briefing every morning with Albert Mohler, and occasionally driving around listening to NPR. And what's interesting about all those things is, I like to look at what's actionable information. Like what can we do with the information that we're getting? And I do think it is incumbent upon Christians, when they are aware of wars, when they're aware of, catastrophes, to be earnest in prayer. And beyond prayer, if there are things that we can do with our dollars, if there are things that we can do with our time to support people in need, I do think that's what Christians do. We've done that since the beginning. We're told to do that, and Christians have consistently done that throughout the history of Christianity. And I want to say that we do that too when we become aware, when you become knowledgeable of a particular need because of a world event or a global crisis. It's nice to have trusted people. Like for us, we trust our church and the people that they bring into our church. We are members at our church. So when they choose to bring somebody up on stage and get them in front of our congregation and ask for support, like we really are trusting our church and our church leadership there, and saying like, oh, this is something that we can get behind in helping remedy where these refugees in this part of the world, or this is something that's going to help remedy, this crisis in this part of the world.
Yeah, and I do think that there are times where all of a sudden you have to have an opinion on something. So, for instance, when the war with Israel started, then immediately I was like, okay, well, I'm not pro-terrorist and I'm pro-Israel. So that's that. It seemed really black and white. And then I remember the first YouTube video that popped up saying something about someone supporting Palestine. And I was just like, what? Like, someone supporting Palestine? What? And then that was like the beginning of this onslaught of all these different opinions on Israel, and then people rebutting those opinions and saying some of them are replacement theology. And then I started thinking, oh, well, what is my opinion on Israel?
Yes.
Like, are they God's chosen people? Are Christians God's chosen people? What does this mean?
Is it the nation of Israel, or is it ethnic Israel?
Yes. Yeah. Like, I just was like, okay, is Israel doing things that are against the law codes? I don't know, whatever you call those things.
Like the war?
Yeah, like war rules, like breaking war rules or whatever. And I feel like I kind of dove into that for a couple days, just figuring out like, okay, what is our theology around Israel? I was asking Elisha a lot of questions. And what does God say about this? Where should we as Christians stand on this side of the issue? And because it was coming up in conversation, I realized I can't really have an opinion on this. I don't know. And all of a sudden, there's a lot more opinions out there than I actually even thought.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where I stand on this. And so that was kind of fun to research all that. Obviously, it's not fun that these are serious issues, and there's serious people's lives that are being lost currently, and it's a really heartbreaking situation. But for us here in America, I'm in North Idaho. I'm not currently in Israel. It's pretty far removed. And so it was kind of a 1 or 2 day thing, a lot of conversation with Elisha. And then I kind of felt like, okay, I know where I stand. I can have a conversation on this. And that was what that was. And that was the actionable piece for me, I guess.
Sure. It was just,
okay, I want to be able to have an answer in this conversation when it comes up.
But as it stands now, it's like our local community has plenty of needs that we get to look to. The global reach that we have through our church, we are grateful for, and we get to support that. And then we pray for those that are in need. We pray that Christ reaches all, and that the gospel is furthered, and that his name is made, that those people in Israel are saved, and that the people in Palestine are saved, and that they all, bend their knee to Christ. that's an easy prayer to make, because that, as much of a Sunday school answer as that is the answer. Like, that is clearly what needs to take place, is that Christ needs to be the king in both those places for there to be peace and for there to be any type of resolution.
Yeah, and obviously this question wasn't specifically speaking to Israel and Palestine. This was just speaking to, what do you do with everything going on in the world? And that is kind of the big topic that is going on right now, headline-wise. There are dozens and dozens and dozens. There is a new evil every day on any news outlet, in any newspaper, because that is what sells. And yes, our world is small. We are very connected. You know, some of you are listening to this podcast in totally different time zones, in totally different countries. So we are connected, and yet we aren't. Sometimes we like to act like we're more connected than we are, I feel like. And the whole internet isn't next door neighbor. And so we don't have to have the same level of interaction with all of this news or be up to date on all of this stuff as we do with our very local news. And so I think sometimes we can get caught up in thinking, well, the world's really, really small, and so I need to know what's going on in Africa and Ukraine and Russia and Israel. And obviously America, we do like to have our fingers in a lot of different pies, for better or for worse. So some of that does pertain to us as a nation and us as countrymen. But I do think that negative news is what sells. And so there is going to be a school shooting, and there is going to be, a child abduction, and there's going to be terrorists hijacking something somewhere from here on out. Like, I'm just assuming that I can find the negativity if I want. And it can really be a swamp where we go in and we just get really mired down. And if that is taking our eyes off of what Christ has for us here on earth, if it's taking our eyes off of the vision and the focus that we need to have with our own families and our own communities, then I really don't see that serving us.
Yeah, I go, once again, Katie, you said it so well. Negativity is always going to be the clickbait, and it's always going to be what gets marketing and advertising dollars. And knowing that, you have to have such a vigilant filter and proactive filter on what you're choosing to inform yourself in. Like, what am I going to proactively go read about? Because if you just are a receiver, if you're just the proverbial baby bird with its mouth open, it's like, hey, feed me, then what you're going to get is only negativity and only the really devastating news all of the time. This was so interesting. It was like 7 or 8 months ago. So it was funny because I got onto, I think, CNN.com. It was an outlet like that, or MSNBC.com. It was a liberal news outlet, and the headline, I think it said, evaluating the shooting in a town in Oregon, the school shooting in a town. It was this town in Oregon. And I thought, oh my goodness, no way, another school shooting. And I started reading, and I was like, wait a second, it was from like 7 years prior, or maybe 12 years prior. Maybe it was 2012 or something. And I thought, oh, that's crazy that really, like, it's almost like the war in Ukraine had gotten boring to people. That wasn't jarring enough. There wasn't enough like bad stuff going on. You know, the war with Israel and Palestine hadn't kicked off yet. They needed something really bad for the front page, for that opening line. News. So they needed like a just kind of a 12-year anniversary gory front page school shooting article. I thought, wow, that's nuts that even when there's not an actively like a school shooting happening, they still have to use that type of visceral news to keep people coming back, to keep people clicking, to keep people subscribed. And I thought that is so indicative of the human brain and how prone we are to just gravitating towards the gory, towards the ugly. And like I said, I don't think as Christians we're supposed to ignore that. Like, I don't know who could like hear about a school shooting and not be just so saddened by that. Like, and when you hear about a war and you hear about the casualties, you're like, that is crazy sad. And so I do think our heart needs to break, and we need to mourn with those that mourn. But I also think that we were never intended to be as informed as we are of all the bad that's happening in the world. It's crazy when you go back and you read the Bible, obviously evil's been around since the fall of man, and it was not as known throughout all the lands. Like what was like the evil that was happening in small town, Podunkville, upstate, whatever, was not known across the country, or definitely not across the world. And you dealt in a very localized manner on the hardships that you were working with through there. And then obviously news would reach about wars, foreign wars, and various famines across the land. And you would then kind of worry about it then, but it wasn't this daily 24/7. I know about like this, today I was hearing about some crisis in Yemen when I was driving and listening to NPR. And so it's like, just pile that on top of everything else that you know. And at some point you're like, I can't, there comes a threshold where you're like, I need to look at what the Lord has for me here in my home and tend to the needs of my children, of my wife, of my local community. And then from there, and I do think that it kind of like, then you are able to see what bandwidth you have afterwards. So it's like you start in your home and with your wife, like, I'm going to pour into her, pour into my children. Then you go out a little further to your community. That's your local church or maybe your neighborhood. And then you start working out, and then your town, your county, your state. And by the time you get to global affairs, whatever bandwidth you have left, you're like, oh, absolutely, yeah, I do want to pray for that. And you pray for it, or you send money, or you talk to somebody, or you help somebody if you can. But I do feel like there needs to be like more and more of an emphasis on localized efforts and being informed on a very localized level.
Yeah, we were kind of laughing about this because our days have been so full recently from early in the morning till late at night. And when we read this question, we were like, it's just not making it on the to-do list to stay up with global news consistently, or to stay up with all that's happening in the world. It's just too much to stay up on all that's happening in the world. And so we get the spark notes, we get the big picture vision. I mean, and when it comes to practically how we're dealing with everything going on in the world, we've got buckets of dry goods. We have a big dry goods pantry. We got that during 2020, and not to prepare for an apocalypse or anything like that, but just we realized during election years and there's going to be wars happening. There's going to be famine. There's going to be different riots. There's going to be things in the news that freak people out, and they all go running to the stores. And we don't want to be running to the stores when everyone's running to the stores. There have been bad times in every generation. We've, here in America, been in a relative generation of ease. Really, it's been almost 2 generations now, where our parents weren't wartime.
3 generations probably.
Well,
almost 3.
No. I wouldn't quite say grandparents, because there are some grandparents that there's some people that fought in the Vietnam War and
lived through the Depression.
So there's that, but it's been a relatively very peaceful time, and we just aren't used to anything resembling conflict. And we freak out at these conflicts that are far away from us because nothing has actually been here in our home for a long time. But that's not saying that that's not going to happen. It's probably going to happen again. So we want to be prepared for that. I mean, we live in North Idaho, guys. We've got guns on our guns. I don't know necessarily how that's going to help us, but you've chosen the wrong house to raid if that's on the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about we didn't buy our food, all of our dried goods and whatever, all that supply for an apocalypse. I just think it is good to be prepared in general for all the reasons that you said. And it's funny because we did this in 2020, and I was grateful that we did it. There were riots happening everywhere. There was people all up in arms about everything, and I'm expecting that to happen again in another presidential election.
Yeah, I'm expecting it in 2024.
And so I am grateful to be, kind of stocked and supplied.
Well, it's peace of mind. It's like when you have money in your savings account and you aren't living to dollar to dollar to dollar. It's peace of mind. Yeah. And so it really bought us a lot of peace of mind to just know that, hey, if stuff's out on the grocery store shelves, that's okay.
Yes.
We're fine. We can survive if that's what the Lord has for us. I love something that N.D. Wilson says, and that is, it stuck with me. I saw this maybe 2 years ago, and that is, I say it all the time, survival is not the goal. Yeah. And I think that's very, very important. Survival is not the goal. Survival was never the goal of the Bible. I mean, our Lord and Savior died for us. And I really want our kids to grow up knowing that there's things that you can do. We watch these stories, or we read stories in books, or we watch them in movies where survival is often the goal. And
Yep.
you see the main character making compromises and you think, well, they've got to survive. I mean, it's a cutthroat world out there. Even if it's not for their own physical survival, they need to somehow keep their job, or they need to keep their status or something. And that results in lying or stealing or doing whatever. And somehow you as the viewer find yourself invested in this protagonist and are cheering them on as they survive.
Yeah.
Because you're in it, you're watching the story for the survival. But here in real life, and as believers, survival's not the goal. So the Lord very well will have suffering for us, or he might have death for us. And that is not the end goal.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something that can be helpful about knowing what's going on in the world, is trying to see where you're at in the story, in the narrative. Because like I said, you read the Old Testament and you read much of the New Testament and you're thinking, man, crazy stuff has always happened. People were getting killed for their faith. God's people have been getting oppressed since forever. And here we are. We're Christians. We're here in the 21st century. What's going on in the world? What's our character, so to speak? Going to N.D. Wilson, that's kind of what he would ask. It's like, what should our character do at this point in the story? And you had never seen this before, but not recently we watched Braveheart, the William Wallace.
Oh yeah, Elisha showed
movie.
me Braveheart.
And that is like a perfect example of what you just said, survival not being the goal. And I don't remember all the characters' names, but you obviously have William Wallace, who is this heroic character that ultimately loses his life for the cause and for, fighting for freedom. But then there's that Lord, right? That is his dad's, like, his mentor. I don't know if you remember
the Bruce, whatever.
Yeah,
the
you're
Bruce.
right, the Bruce, exactly. He's one of the nobles there, and I think he is. Yeah, he's a lord of one lands.
Yeah,
and his dad's his mentor, and he's telling him basically everything you were just saying.
Yeah, he's telling him, this is how you survive.
This is how you survive, exactly. And
this is how you ride this out.
Yeah, you got to kiss the ring, so to speak. Just kind of go along with the oppressive, English rule here. And do not go along with this William Wallace. This guy's a radical. Like, he's fighting on principle. Principle is going to get you killed. Have some compromise, and you'll be able to live to tell about it. And the conflict in that character's heart, in the Bruce, was one that I think a lot of Christians probably feel. I know I've felt it before, because you're hearing that voice in your head saying, well, yeah, like, if I just go along, and that's it's so clear to me when I'm watching this, what this means to me. It's so clear to me that it's like, yeah, just don't bring up, like, Christ's death and resurrection in this context. Don't bring up, like, the sin of homosexuality to these people. Don't, necessarily deter people from propagating whatever their agenda is, with some progressive ideology. And it's like, it was so clear to me what that compromise was for me this day and age. And I think that when you know the world events, that can be a very easy thing too. Because, like, you were even talking about the world events, there's always instantaneously, like, two narratives. Whenever there's a war, whenever there's a famine, whenever there's an oppressed people, you're going to have, like, these two narratives, and it's like, so which side are you gonna be on? And as much as it's obviously, it's not like you have to choose a side. You want to stand with truth. Like, in your heart of hearts, I think usually which one is the side of compromise, where you're kind of like, oh, this one's, like, more culturally acceptable. If I go, and the culturally acceptable line for always is like, well, it's complicated.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually there's someone, the third perspective is the most likely to be applauded, and that is straight down the middle, where you're kind of like, well, there's some good things on this side, and there's some good things on this side, and bad things on both sides. And not that that's not true. Sometimes that's the right stance to take, but sometimes it's just kind of, I don't know, overcomplicating it a little bit.
Yeah, it is. It is,
like with Roe versus Wade. Like, I'll just say
example.
Every Christian, and not a lot, but some of the Christians that I respected were trying to do this whole, it's complicated. And it's like, you know what? It's not complicated. When our country is ruling that babies shouldn't be dying at these different stages, that is a win. And you take it as a win.
Or, I mean, just
without being
primarily
overturned.
ruling against the killing of babies.
Yes.
It's not good if people are ruling that they can be killed at various stages.
No.
That's not good.
That's not what I was saying. It's
Yes.
not a perfect win, but you can just cheer that it's a step in the right direction.
Sure, you can cheer that.
Unapologetically.
But then just you take the subject as a whole, and abortion is not a complicated situation.
No.
And I've been persuaded by people in the past that it's great. Well, you don't know this scenario and that scenario and the health of this and the health of her. And it's like, when it comes down to it, there are people that think it's okay to kill babies, and there's those that don't think it's okay to kill babies under any circumstances. And I just stand on the side that it's never okay to kill babies under any circumstances.
Flat out, survival is not the goal.
Yeah.
You have to come back to that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes that is going to mean hardship for the mom.
Yes.
And often it will mean hardship for the mom. And that's just not the goal.
Yeah. Again, just like look at the history of humankind. Like that is the sacrifice of parenthood. Like the sacrifice of mothers and fathers for their children is kind of built into the equation in a lot of ways. In the way this, it doesn't have to be that way. And obviously we're grateful when it's not that way, but that's a common part of history. And going back to just that narrative of survival not being the goal, I want that to be so clear for me, because boy, is it so easy to look retroactively at whatever, William Wallace and be like, oh yeah, like he was a virtuous man that lived according to principle, and that's so admirable and honorable. And then you condemn people you condemn Christians that stood silently while the Holocaust was happening, like German Christians that like turned a blind eye. And then you see the Christians that stood up stood against the evil, and they were killed for it. And you're like, well, that's definitely what I would be doing.
Okay.
Like I would be doing that. Right. But then you put yourself into here we are in 2023 and you're like, what are the atrocities that I am being that Christian that's turning a blind eye? Or like, I kind of like my life. I like being comfortable. I like, being able to go out to dinner and go on dates with my wife. And in that, it's like, you're like, what are the things I'm full on turning a blind eye to for the sake of comfort and the praise of man?
I'm getting convicted over and over and over reading The Hiding Place to the kids, because Casper Ten Booms, Corey's dad, he has this opportunity when he goes before the Gestapo. The Gestapo's like, hey, you're an old man, just go on home, and just don't cause any more trouble. And this old guy stands up and he's like, I am going to go home, and the first Jew that asks me for help, I'm going to open the door to him and help him. And then instantly, all kindness is turned off, and this old man is like totally mistreated. But like, how easy would that be to just think, oh, that's a great opportunity. I'm just going to slide on home quietly, and I'm going to continue quietly helping Jews. But he just like stood so firmly for what he believed in. Anyways, there's dozens of instances like that in this book where I'm like, you what?
Yeah, boy, that
Very
is
convicting.
That is convicting, because like you said, they were just giving him the out. They're like, hey, here's an easy out. Like you can back up, you can back out of this real easily. And he lived consistently with his Christian convictions.
Yeah, just like boldly.
Yes.
It wasn't like this undercover Christianity.
Yes.
And I really respect that. I think that it's so easy for us to talk about hardship or bad things when we're sitting here in our cozy little studio. What comes to mind is the movie Cinderella Man, actually. I've had this. It's kind of like my nightmare a little bit, because the couple's relationship before the Great Depression reminds me so much of ours. It's just like, it's romantic. They love each other. Their life's beautiful. It's awesome. And then you see them, the depression's happening. He's can't provide because, everyone's starving. Their kids are starving. She sends their kids away. They're getting into these fights. And it's just like brutal, right? And that very well may be in our future. And I trust that the Lord's grace will be sufficient if he brings us through something like that or something worse. And so I'm just catching the irony of us sitting here being so optimistic, I guess, about the future, talking about these heavy terms so lightly, when it's like, I have never had to actually choose between my survival or my comfort of any kind. Okay. Yeah. I have grown up in a very comfortable situation. And so I can only trust that God's strength will be sufficient in my weakness when he asks us to walk through times that are extremely trying.
Yeah.
But that said, regardless of how that looks, whether that looks economic or whether that looks just, in our own family, there's families that who cares about what's going on in the rest of the world? They're walking through one of the darkest times of their life just within their own little family, and no one knows about it, right? And you could walk through incredible tragedy and it never hits a headline. And so I really think we don't know what the future holds, and we can sit around being dreary about it, and who knows what's going to happen. We can sit around our entire lives being dreary about it, and what we're scared of never ends up happening.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow, what a waste of anxiety.
Exactly. Like, we are told to be anxious for nothing. And I think the big reason for that is because the Lord is reigning. He is currently reigning. He is currently in control. He's currently on his throne. And I do think that theology really comes into play when it comes to how we view the world. Because when you have this perspective of nothing can stop God's gospel from going out, people are getting saved, more people are getting saved. That is something that we can celebrate, regardless of what happens to our particular country, or regardless to what happens to our particular lives. God's mission is being accomplished, and nothing is happening outside of him allowing that to happen. And so when you have this complete belief that, hey, things are going according to plan, there is incredible peace that you can have in that, knowing that.
Yeah, that is so nice to think about. And I would couple that, and I agree with everything that you said. It's like, here we are, like sitting in our nice climate controlled studio talking about catastrophes and crazy things happening throughout the world and people dying, and throwing our opinion on it. But here, that's what we're doing. So we'll keep doing it. And speculating to like, what would we do in those circumstances? We really get to answer the question what we do today. It's like, that's faithful with a little will be faithful with much. And if you can't live faithfully before the Lord in the comfort of America, then I don't think you're set up to live faithfully in a war zone or experiencing great, oppression for your faith. And here we have an opportunity to live faithfully before the Lord day in and day out. And like you said, Katie, babe, putting our hope in the finished work of Christ and the mission that he's going to see through to completion, and that we are on that, like, that's our guy, like that's our master and commander, and that's the one we're following. And when you start off your day knowing, like, okay, we're going to die someday, and so survival is a bad goal because it's not attainable. Like, we're going to die.
True. You're failing from the start.
Yeah. And so you say, okay, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's tonight, tomorrow, or in 80 years, I'm going to die, and I want to live faithfully to my leader. I want to walk in a way that's worthy of the calling wherewith he's called us to, and not in a self-righteous way, not in some legalistic way where you think you're going to earn any of your righteousness, but in response to what he's done for us, and in light of the reality that we are now his children. We are children of the light. We are his, workmen created, or we are his handiwork, created in Christ Jesus for his good works. And, we're his ambassadors. We are his soldiers here on earth. And so it's when you consider all of that, my hope would be that you come away and be like, okay, yeah, I would stand in front of the firing line for Christ, because I'm going to die. I want to die, like dying for the cause, explicitly for the cause of Christ, or very definitively. What a glorious way to die.
Well, yeah, something else that I always used to be, going back to theology, something else that I always used to be concerned about was, I'd see these people apostatizing or hear about people apostatizing. And then you read like Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it's like, I can never sustain that. Yeah. Like, I'm going to give up. And that was one of my biggest fears as a child, was apostatizing if Christians in my country came under the persecution that people in other countries are going under as we speak and have for generations and centuries. And the Lord has just completely freed me from that and reminded me that he started the work, right? He that is faithful to begin a good work in us will finish it. And I think that that is so encouraging for me, knowing that, oh, I'm Christ's. He has me. Nothing is going to change that here on earth. Nothing's going to change that when it comes to my children. He is my children. And he's the one who does the saving. He saved them. He saved me. He's going to keep me saved. And regardless of what happens, he has me.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the stuff going on in the world, I guess I just have complete peace. I don't think about it on a day in and day out basis because none of it is specifically like in any way, shape, or form affecting North Idaho. So we're just chilling over here. And I will say that we've kept this perspective. Like, I think 2020 was probably the most we've been affected by something here in our country.
Sure.
Like as far as you and me and stuff like that. And it was interesting to see how different people handled that, because I never think that we are called to, thinking of the parable of the talents, sit on our talent out of fear and just wait for the Lord to show up. We are always supposed to be investing. We're always supposed to be building. We're always supposed to be growing what he has given us.
Yeah.
And so if researching the headlines and sitting in front of your computer, or my computer, watching reels or news outlets or whatever the case may be, and then we go in and we're anxious and we're depressed and we aren't investing into our children and we aren't investing into our marriage and we don't have a multi-generational mindset because we all think it's going to go up in smoke tomorrow and we all think we're going to get bombed or whatever. We're never called to that. At least I never see that in scripture. We're always supposed to be furthering the mission that God has given us here on earth for as long as we could possibly do it. And if he stops us via bombing or via tragedy of any kind, then we're stopped and we can be clear that, hey, there's a lightning bolt here. This is the will of God. We're just supposed to, scratch and claw and
but you
do
would
whatever
be,
he's called us to.
You would be busy about his work, hopefully.
Yes.
You would be keeping yourself occupied with the work that he's laid before us.
But we're always supposed to be occupied with the work that is laid before us. And so if what is going on in the world is not the work that the Lord has given you to do right now, then I would say close the computer and do what he's given you to do. Because it doesn't affect us currently.
Yes, it doesn't.
So I guess we aren't handling what's going on in the world right now.
Yes, to answer the question, how do you deal with all that's going on in the world?
We aren't dealing with it.
Yeah.
We're knowledgeable of it, and then we're moving on because we don't have to deal with it right now. Right? And we might have to in the future.
It's not ours to deal with right now. Yeah, because of the positions that we're in and where we live and what we're doing for work. Like I said, as Christians, you cast your cares before the Lord with prayer and supplication. You make your requests be made known unto him. And then what the peace of God that passes all understanding guides and keeps you. And so I do think that, with what you're knowledgeable of, you are, I think it is, as Christians, we pray about it and we cast our cares before the Lord.
Yeah.
But then with what our hand finds to do that day, you do it heartily as unto him. And I'm with you, Katie. If consuming news and if, having that be a part of your mental nutrition, with what you're consuming on a regular basis is hindering the work that he has before you, just get rid of it. And I will say this too, for the work that he has for most people, the information that's most helpful for that is usually the hardest information to access. And the information that's the easiest to access is usually not that helpful to what he has you being about.
That's good.
Well, I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I think. No, I do think it's true.
I stand with you.
You stand with me? Yeah. Well, don't stand too close. No. You can stand as close as you want. But I think of that with information, it's so much like food where like the easiest to access is like the worst for you and the least helpful. And when you think of like the budgets of the huge media outlets, right? Like the billions of dollars, these corporations worth billions of dollars, and what they are able to spend in ad money, and in marketing dollars to get it in front of you. That's the easiest to get, right? Because it's just coming right at you. It's the least helpful for our journey. And then you think of what's the most helpful for fatherhood or for motherhood or for growing in your Christian faith. It's usually the hardest information to access.
It's like the Bible written in really tiny print and
Yeah. And that's what, and it's
complex.
convicting because you're like, oh, it's not that hard. It's right in front of me. But that's how the human brain works. What's easier is sliding through, like you said, reels.
Well, it's not
or
appealing. It's not flashy. It's
Yes.
not lights. It's not celebrity gossip on it. It's
Yeah. You don't find yourself like, wait, you're like, wow, I just spent 4 hours in the Word, like you do when you get lost in social media. People get lost in social media and they get lost in these apps. And I think that that's just something that I've deceived myself in and been like, oh, I don't read the news. Like I don't get on news outlets or I don't get, but I'm spending multiple hours a day watching short clips of news, on YouTube or on what Instagram, thinking that I'm not getting on news outlets. It's like, of course, like this is worse. This is like worst. This is a worse version of just getting on and reading the news. You should just get the paper, the newspaper if you're going to be doing that. But I often think about that with what's the most advantageous for what we are called to. It usually requires a lot of intentionality in accessing that information and having it equip us. And the information that's coming to us with ease, that's just like free flowing to us, is usually like counterproductive to it's usually a hindrance to what we want to be accomplishing.
yeah, that's good. Thanks, Elisha.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I would also say if you do think something is impending or is going to happen, then taking action on that can give you peace of mind too.
No doubt, yes.
Just in the moment. It's never a good idea to just sit there and wallow and stew. So like when we were stressed out about like, hey, maybe there's going to be a food crisis in our country, going out and buying food was a very peace of mind thing for us to do. If you do think there's going to be World War III, and then maybe like, I don't know, train for it or come up with a family what you would do if there was a draft or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like have a plan of action for it. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but even going through that process can maybe give you more peace of mind.
Taking action is always helpful. It
Yes.
reduces stress and it lowers anxiety. And yeah, you at the end of taking your action, you realize, oh, you know what? My only hope is in the Lord. Like, I mean, you should
Yes.
be thinking that the entire time. But I even think of that when there was like Hamas had like some call to arms, I think, like a couple days after the terrorist attack in Israel. And it was, I forget what they call it, like a day of reckoning or a day of vengeance or something. And so some people in my community were kind of sending out warnings to be like, hey, be aware, this is something that's going on. And clearly there's a lot of Islamic radicals in the U.S. And so you need to be aware in your communities and what's going on. And so I like did a full on inventory check, of like, okay, where are my weapons? What
would we do if something like a terrorist attack happened in our community?
Yes. Like what are escape routes? And after doing that for like 5 minutes, you realize you're pretty dang vulnerable. You're like, well, sure, I'll put up a fight if I can, but it still felt good to kind of like think it through and to be like, okay, well, at the end of the day, like with prayer and supplication, make your request be known to God. Set the alarm system, lock the doors, go to bed. You still have to get up the next morning. But it was kind of, I don't know, there was something that brought a peace of mind of like going through our own checklist. It's like, okay, are our go bags ready? Do we have
We
all of our
almost
things?
shot the mail delivery guy, but
Yeah, I was pretty high strung at that point.
Halloween, we had this bus drive up, like unmarked bus at 11 at night.
Way too late. And this, I don't know, this is bad.
I don't
know what they were doing. This is
tell the
on
whole
them.
story,
No, I'm
but-
not going to. That
But it gave us a good
it was a good little practice run.
Good
Like how you
little
and I would do
adrenaline
under
burst.
stress,
because if a terrorist attack happens, it is happening at our house in our suburb. Anyways, we've had our fair share of taking maybe too much action. But anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed that video.
Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.